This is Nick Redding, and you're listening to PreserveCast, a podcast with a worldwide listenership that explores the broad world of preservation from every angle, from drones to mudlarking and everything in between. Now, let's get preserving. Ask anyone working in the trades about who we should be keeping an eye on, and many will tell you Amy McAuley. It's for that reason that I knew we had to get Amy on PreserveCast and release that episode in conjunction with our celebration and recognition of women in preservation and the historic trades. Known for working with hand tools, that means no power tools, Amy is a master craftsperson making waves in a field that deserves far more attention. This is Nick Redding, and you're listening to PreserveCast. Today, we're very excited to be joined by Amy McAuley, who serves as the preservation joiner at George Washington's Mount Vernon. And so we're going to be talking about all things trades and caring for a place like Mount Vernon. But obviously, we love to get to know our guests, their background, upbringing, what got them interested in history and preservation. So, Amy, you have a really fascinating job, and we're going to talk about that. But what's your backstory? How did you get into all of this?
Oh, it's a long and crooked road that that has got me to Mount Vernon. I was raised with a love for history, namely through my grandmother, and we lived next to their farm, and so I pretty much spent all of my time with her and my grandfather. She did a lot of genealogy, so I learned a lot about my family history through her. And there came a day when I was like, I think I want to be an archaeologist. And she said to me, there's no money in that profession. And so instead, I got a degree in fine arts, which, equally doesn't have a lot of cash flow. And once I had gotten my degree from the University of Oregon, I struggled to figure out, if you're going to be an artist, you're usually going to be freelance, therefore you're a business. And I was very hesitant to start a business. I didn't have any sort of background in that. And it seemed very daunting. So I moved to Portland, Oregon, and did some odd jobs for a bit. And then I had a friend tell me one summer that she was working with a general contractor, and he needed help for the summer, and he hired 5 women to work with him on a project. And he said, I'll keep one of you after the summer. And I was with him for about 7 years. He does have a degree in historic preservation. So I was exposed at that point to what historic preservation was, because I didn't really understand it that well. And he showed me some, basic skills along the lines of preservation. But eventually he kind of went the way of a remodeler, or kind of a general contractor situation. And there came a point where I, wasn't really finding a lot of joy in that. And at that point is when I started my business in Oculus Fine Carpentry. And I've been Oculus for over 20 years before I came here to Mount Vernon. And I sent my business cards, or I placed them at a window shop, a shop that makes new windows, and also you can purchase replacement, like Marvins and such. And so all my calls were windows, obviously, of people that wanted to restore them and not, toss them into the dumpster. And so I immediately found myself very busy doing exclusively windows. And I needed to get up to speed with how they're created, what goes into the restoration of windows. And, just started doing research, and slowly got some skills. And eventually I was noticed by SHPO, and they were starting to refer me to people. And that's when I began doing nonprofit work and working with state parks on more unique structures, house museums, lighthouses, uh, all manner of strange buildings that you might see on a state park or a friends group might own.
It's interesting. It seems like we've interviewed a variety of different tradespeople, over the course of our work here and interviewing folks. And it seems like, in a silly way, windows are like the gateway drug to trades work. It seems like well, people needed their windows done, and so I started doing windows, and then before you know it, I'm working on lighthouses. I mean, it's like. Do you think is that a common thing? Is it just because there's so much window work out there, or is it a simpler type of trade skill? What is it about windows? Is it just the volume?
I don't think it's simpler. In fact, they're quite complicated. And if you've ever tried to take apart your own window, you would quickly come to that understanding.
I have, and I've screwed it up. So yeah, I know exactly what you're talking about.
For a while when I first started out, there wasn't a lot of people doing restoration of windows, at least in Portland. And they're attractive, right? The old ones are good looking. They have wavy glass. They have character about them, and people didn't want to toss them into the dumpster. And so, because I was, there weren't many of people doing it in Portland. I was super busy, and it moved on from that point. Eventually, more and more people started to get into the field and became businesses in Portland, and I was able to refer work out when there came a point where I was pretty much exclusively governmental and nonprofit projects, and I kind of stopped doing residential work, and so I referred I was able to refer out to people that I knew that were doing the work.
So there's a big focus right now, and some of the work that we're doing with a project we have called the Campaign for Historic Trades, which is a partnership with the National Park Service. But there's a lot of interest right now, as there has been for years, but about trades training. And I'm curious, you mentioned it in passing, doing research, kind of, you obviously were working with a GC and all that kind of thing. But talk to us about your training experience. What was it like? Was it more you did it yourself? Did you, sort of apprentice yourself to a master? How did you go through trades training, or how did you get the skill set?
Well, there's no masters in working in window restoration or building of windows in general. I would say that one of the pivotal moments in my career, and I've been thinking about this as of late because I just turned 50. Looking back at my career, at the places where I chose a path, and by choosing that is how I've gotten to where I am now. And one of those moments was I was working on a nonprofit house outside Portland, and with a friends group and with grant money, of course, you have a lot of people that come to meetings, and you don't work in a vacuum. You have to, discuss things and agree on stuff. And a timber framer, a good friend of mine, David Rogers, was there, and we needed some windows made new for the house because they had been replaced with aluminum replacements, and the nonprofit wanted them to look like the rest of the house. And so I went to the shop where, I did, and I got a quote for the shop making new windows. And I brought the bid back to the meeting in the group, and David said, well, I think those windows should be hand built, because not only are you providing a product in keeping with the character of the house, but you're also keeping a dying craft alive. And I looked at him and I was like, well, gosh, I don't know how people make these by hand. And it pretty much, that sentence defined kind of the second half of my career, because I became so obsessed with learning how windows were made by hand. I started amassing hand tools, learning how to use them through trial and error. I had some friends on a social media page in England who told me, okay, try this or try that. Or when you're bringing in antique tools, there's a lot of tune-up you have to do. So they would help me figure out, do I need a new iron? How can I fix this? Something's janky. So through a lot of trial and error, I eventually became fairly comfortable using the hand tools, and I started learning how to build hand planes, very specific ones. There's side escapement, sash profile planes. And I needed to be able to build those so that I was able to go 100% unplugged.
And that's now, so I've heard sort of through the grapevine, and one of the reasons we wanted to talk to you, and I think it's maybe a good segue to talk about your work as a joiner, and we need to define that for folks too. But that you do almost all of your work without power tools. Is that true? Is that like your I don't know if that's your thing, but is that what Amy McAuley is known for? It sounds pretty cool. It sounds pretty hardcore.
Yeah, that is.
You're unplugged. You're like, it's like preservation unplugged.
Yes. So once I was able to build those planes and the irons, I sold all my power tools in one big sale.
Wow.
And looking back on that moment, that was really crazy. I won't deny that. I don't know. I was so, it felt like I was put on this earth to do this work by hand, and to keep a dying craft alive, essentially. There's not a lot of people doing sash building by hand. I know there are folks that know how to do it, and but for some reason I felt like I needed to just go cold turkey, sell them all, and sink or swim with my business.
And I guess you swam, and then you swam all the way across the country to Mount Vernon. And so for people who are listening who may not be familiar, we've got listeners all across the world and a lot of different, types of work, and people who are just interested in preservation, passionate about it, all that kind of thing. What is a joiner? Is it a carpenter? What is the difference between a joiner and a carpenter, and why are you a joiner? And then we'll talk about what that means at Mount Vernon. But let's define the term, because I think a lot of people probably aren't familiar with that term nowadays.
Joiner is someone that usually works at a bench. So you're doing joinery at a bench. For me at Mount Vernon, I'm working on windows and doors. So we would remove them from the buildings, and I'm able to work at them at a workshop or a bench. I also run moldings at the bench for Mount Vernon. So historically, the differentiation between the carpenter and the joiner profession was joiner works with joints, as in windows, doors, that sort of finer joinery, whereas the carpenter is usually out in the field, on site, the building site, putting the buildings, putting them up, essentially.
Was the joiner, would you consider, and I'm sure that there would be some squabbling over this, but would you consider the joiner to be, is it a higher skill set than a carpenter, or just a different skill set?
I would say just a different skill set. I don't think, putting Mount Vernon together is no easy thing.
Right.
All those timbers. And, I do work with a carpenter here who is, taught me a lot about timber framing, because I don't have that background. And I've had to come up to speed fairly quickly on that, because, with COVID, we've had some reduction of staff.
I was just going to say, that it might be a good segue to talk about Mount Vernon. You're talking about you're working with Carpenter and all that kind of stuff. So, like, I know this is a funny question for most people, like, what's a typical day? I don't really have a typical day. So I don't know if you do, but what kind of projects, what do you do at Mount Vernon? What sort of projects do you work on? I think a lot of people think like, well, the building's in, fantastic shape. What do you mean you have to keep working on it? I mean, obviously it needs repair and all those sorts of things, but Maybe give us some examples of projects that you're either working on currently or you have worked on that people should know about, and then we'll talk about maybe what's challenging, what's coming up, all that kind of stuff. But let's just talk about Mount Vernon.
Well, I'm an early person, so I get here early in the morning. I usually like to take a walk up to the mansion and historic area. For those who've never been here, our estate is quite large. It's over 400 acres. There's about a half a mile between my office workshop space and the historic area. So you do have to walk a bit to actually get up to the historic area. And I do, and I like to walk up there because it reminds me of where I am. Occasionally, and if I'm spending a lot of time in the office or in the workshop, I forget where I'm working or what I'm doing. And for my work, it's very important to ground myself and go up and see the historic area, see the mansion. I have to remember there's an enormous amount of weight by working here put on your shoulders. I mean, there's a presence of the house, of the historic nature of the site that is unlike anything I've ever worked on. So I do like to do that morning walk. Plus, it gives me a chance to look at all of our repair work that we've done and to make sure that things are not changing or there's something odd going on. And then I do have meetings during the week that I attend. This is very much a team effort here at the architecture department. And so we have a lot of discussion about things, about process, things that have come up. So I certainly don't work by myself or make decisions by myself. And at that point, after meetings, I go up and I usually work in the workshop, which is where the benches are. And depending upon what's happening, it varies. I do have to juggle quite a few projects at one time. With windows and doors, there's opportunity for juggling of projects in that, you'll have product drying, coatings drying, glazing putty drying. So there's, opportunities to, do other work at that point. I'm currently working on the new room door restoration. I'm also working on the North Garden House sash. And I'm also working on the grist mill, which is another historic structure that we have, but it's down the road a bit there. It's built in the 30s, so it's not as old as the historic area buildings are. So, my work does vary. We have upcoming, there's our big project for the year is the north-south end of the mansion are being restored. And all of the rustication is coming off. We do repairs to the wood siding, and then we redo the sand coat that's on the siding. At that point, I am in charge of the windows. So all the windows get restored at that point. We also have to install the Venetian. The Venetian window was something that I was involved with in 2018 here. It was a massive project. At that point, I was still a contractor, so I was brought in from Oregon, and I did that work with the then conservator that was here, and that was a big project.
What would you say of all of this is, I'm sure it's all challenging, but is there one aspect that really pops out? Is it the weight of the place? Is it making sure that you get it right? Is it working in a building where so many eyes are on it or so many people are going through it? What's something that just is a pervasive challenge?
All those things are a constant presence. I think for me, the biggest ones are having to bring 110% of myself every day. It can be exhausting. And then the other is how we, we'll do a repair, and then, we get to watch it either fail or succeed.
Isn't that sort of just life?
It is, but it's funny because when I was a contractor, I did my work, and as best as I could, and then, I walked away from it, essentially. And, the maintenance and the upkeep was all done by others. And I just hoped that, they kept it up, well maintained, so that my repairs that I did were, had longevity to them. Here, we're doing the maintenance. And so, it is insightful, but it's also can be at times discouraging if things don't go as you planned, or if there's some odd thing that happens. So then you have to kind of, come back and reassess the process you did, where potentially there were issues. How can you change it for the better? So those two things are probably the most challenging.
Well, this might be a good place for us to take a quick break. And then when we come back, let's talk about trades training, the future of these trades. You talked about keeping trades alive, so let's talk a little bit about that. And we'll do that right here on PreserveCast. We want to thank Oliver Pluff & Company for sponsoring today's episode of PreserveCast. Oliver Pluff & Company tells the story of historic American beverages, including teas, spiced drinks, cacao, and coffee, for historic sites, national parks, gourmet markets, and consumers looking for a great beverage hand-packaged in signature artisan tins. To enjoy a cup of history and learn more about what Oliver Pluff & Company offers, please visit oliverpluff.com. That's Oliver Pluff, spelled PLUFF.com. This is Nick Redding. You're listening to PreserveCast. Again, today we're joined by Amy McAuley, who is the preservation joiner at George Washington's Mount Vernon. We've been talking about her path to the trades, talking about the work that she does at Mount Vernon, the weight of that work, the gravity of it, and the challenges associated with that. And, just trades training in general have a lot of challenges. Given that you've been working in this for, a considerable period of time, you've seen it from the private sector side, you're working sort of in the nonprofit sector now. Are you optimistic about the future of historic trades? And then maybe sort of as a follow-up to that, what do you think needs to be changed? What I guess perhaps what concerns you? What would you like to see changed?
Fairly optimistic. I think that there is an increase in interest in the trades. I think the work of some of the trade schools like ACBA and North Bennett and Belmont, have raised the option of trades for say a high school student or a young person, or really an old person, you can do it whenever you want, to have an opportunity to, go down that road. And I think that, I was not aware of those schools when I, was applying to colleges. And so I think the one thing I would like to see happen is more presence, just out there in the world of historic trades, so that, people out west, or like students out west, can understand that that's an option. I don't think college is right for every person. And I think there are people out there that are gifted with their hands, and we need those people to potentially, take up these preservation trades. And for myself, it's always been a challenge to have apprentices. As a small business owner, you don't have a lot of extra cash to hire somebody and pay workman's comp, any sort of benefits, and still make ends meet. And that was my big challenge when I had my business. I tried it twice, but because what I was doing with the Unplugged was so foreign and so out of everyone's wheelhouse, I spent 8 hours of my day training. That's all I did was train. And the projects were not moving along as quickly as I needed them to make ends meet. So, having these colleges that offer training and also internship potential at some sites, because we at Mount Vernon take on an apprentice or an intern from ACBA every year. And so these up and coming tradespeople are getting exposure to kind of what we do in our philosophy, which is great. And we hope that they go out and either start their own business or become a valuable asset to someone's, work on some of these structures. So I would like to see more of the trades talked about in the media, profiled at conferences, places like, I know it's hard for tradespeople to access APT, but it would be great if there was some sort of representation of the trades there at those bigger conferences. This year, I became involved with ICOMOS and joined the International Wood Committee. Traditional trades and crafts are a major component of their charter. And so I would like to, find a way to help them in any way I can promote historic trades and crafts. So, those are some of the ways that some of my thoughts on historic trade and craft.
Yeah, it's important and it's timely. Speaking of trades and preservation, all those sorts of things, do you have any favorite must-read trades or preservation books that people should be picking up that sort of inspired you or that you love?
Conserving Buildings by Martin Weaver. That's a big one. That's a good place to start for doing some more conservation level work on structures. What else? The English, what is it called? Practical Building series by English Heritage those are excellent texts. They are expensive, but occasionally you run across a sale on those. But they are worth every penny.
And for those listening, they couldn't see Amy, but she leaned over and looked. It looks like she has them right next to her there.
Yeah, so. I have a couple right here.
So they're right at her fingertips there.
The timber book is about to fall apart, but We'll get him fixed up. So those are excellent. There's actually a lot of information on the Wood Committee website. We publish the proceedings from our conferences, and there are papers there that talk about conservation globally. Some of it is hands-on, and some of it is theoretical and policy. Those are good places to find information if you're thinking outside of the U.S. or England. Let's see. Those are the ones right off the top of my head.
So if people want to learn more or find out about you or what you're doing at Mount Vernon, where can they do that? What's the best way to follow what's up with you?
Well, I am on social media, Facebook and Instagram. I don't do Twitter. I'm sorry. It's a big time suck. So those are two places that you can look. Facebook, I'm in there under my name. On Instagram, it's Oculus Window. I'm also a resident curator for Fairfax County, which means I am restoring a house in exchange for paying rent, essentially. And so I will be starting a blog on that project fairly soon.
Because you just don't get enough of it at work, so you have to go home and restore a building?
Well, let me tell you, housing around here is expensive. The DC metro area is very costly.
Yeah.
And so this was one way where I could live nearby, and I will say that being here, it can be very tedious. The work is, for instance, the new room door, I'm having to remove paint coatings like layer by layer. So it's very detailed, and sometimes I just want to go home and build a staircase or build, just get in there and build something from start to finish in a weekend, or, get up there and fix my gutter.
I think that would be a great pull quote for this episode. Sometimes I just want to go home and build a staircase. That's never been said on PreserveCast. I've never said it, but I love it. I think it encapsulates this conversation very well.
So, with the resident curatorship, not only is it giving me housing on a beautiful spot in Lorton, Virginia, but I'm also restoring and able to actually work and do physical labor on a historic structure and saving it for, the state of Virginia. It's a little unusual building in that it's a peeled log construction built in 1876. And so it's been fun so far. And
well, we'll have to have you back maybe to talk a little bit about that and about your new staircase there. Before we go, this is generally the most difficult question for anyone, particularly someone in your sort of position, but what's your favorite historic place or site? And we'll just give you a pass and say, of course, it's Mount Vernon, because that's where you work right now. But if you had to go beyond Mount Vernon.
Well, that's a hard one, I have to say. I've worked on 7 lighthouses in Oregon and Washington State. And people, when I talk to people, they're like, oh, it must be magical. And I'm like, it's hell on earth is what it is. Heceta Head Lighthouse might be up there as one of my favorite places. It was my first project with the lighthouse where I had to build all the sash for it. So it does hold a special place. It was grueling work, as all lighthouses are, but it's one of my favorites.
Well, I think
you can Google that.
I was going to say we will make sure to put a link to that in the show notes here. And
I forgot to say that if you do want to find out about my older work, my website might be a good place to start because I have a lot of information on that.
And what's the website address?
www.oculuswindow.com.
Cool. We'll put a link to that in the show notes as well. Well, this is probably a good place for us to wrap this up. You probably need to go and peel a layer of paint. And then maybe this weekend build a staircase. I don't know.
There you go.
But it's been so much fun. So interesting to talk with you. And again, I would love to have you back and maybe talk about the curatorship project. Thanks so much for joining us, Amy.
Okay, thank you.
Thanks for listening to PreserveCast. To dig deeper into this episode's story, head over to preservecast.org for show notes and our collection of previous episodes. Don't forget to engage with this podcast by subscribing, commenting, and leaving a review. Follow along on Instagram, Twitter, and Facebook at PreserveCast for even more. PreserveCast is currently recorded in Walkersville, Maryland, and sponsored by the 1772 Foundation, and powered by Preservation Maryland. Thanks for listening, and keep on preserving.